Take a look inside your fridge or your food cupboard. Check out the shelf in your bathroom or that crammed, minute space under the sink. Chances are, you're relying on products from a handful of corporations to wash your hair, clean your tub, feed your pets, and your kids. It's the conglomerate model of doing business, and it's having a rough time of it in the consumer space. The pandemic-era price bubble is over, and competition is fierce from smaller independent products, as well as retailers' own brands. So what does it all mean for consumers and the corporate giants that rely on them? We thought we'd find out. It's what we do here on Reuters Econ World. Every week, we pick a phrase or buzzword and go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. So this week, consumer conglomerates. I'm your host, Carmel Crimmins, in Dublin. A conglomerate is a company made up of different, sometimes unrelated, businesses. Organizations embraced the concept in the 20th century. The logic is that size and diversity matters. Corporations can share costs and expertise across different units, cross-sell products to customers, and when one part of the company is struggling, another is flourishing. That's the theory. But the model began to fall out of favour in the 1980s. And after the 2008 financial crisis, activist investors led a push to break up industrial conglomerates. Their stocks often suffered from what became known as the conglomerate discount. Their weakest units set the standard for how the market viewed them. The model of many brands under one roof is still popular in the consumer space, some of hundreds of household names. But it's a model that here too is coming under pressure. To find out why, I thought I'd ask some experts. So I'm delighted to have Vanessa O'Connell, our global consumer editor, and Jessica DiNapoli, our US consumer goods correspondent, on the show. Vanessa and Jessica, welcome.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So first off, I've got to ask you guys, covering consumer products, does it affect your purchasing habits at all?
Well, yes, a little bit. I have to admit my husband does a lot of the food shopping.
Is that because you're sick of the sight of like consumer brands because you write about them all day?
That he's also very price sensitive. He is a very, very on top of the cost of things to the ounce.
I love it.
Yeah. So he is the shopper in the home, but I do step in when I'm making something for my son or buying like sensitive skin things for like his body wash, his shampoo. I step in on those things and I am aware of what's going on. And my view of the consumer product space has changed since covering it. I do actually buy the big brands more often.
Oh, interesting. What about you, Vanessa?
Yeah, so I'm the global consumer and retail editor, super fun job. Through this role, we look a lot at the big food, big consumer products companies, the conglomerates, and how they're performing. Are they able to reach consumers like me and like other members of my team, like all of us? So it's super fun to go to the store and look at what we're shown on a retail shelf through the lens of a journalist who covers business. Lately, we've been really excited about looking at some insurgent brands, some newcomers that seem to be gaining momentum with shoppers who are sick of high prices, sick of processed food, and probably just sick of the same old, same old.
So Vanessa, put the consumer conglomerate into perspective for us. Like the concept has been around for decades of the conglomerate, but when we think of it, or certainly when I think of it, I usually think of like GE or Toshiba or Siemens, the big industrial brands. What's the kind of the backstory, the history of the consumer conglomerate?
I would say the consumer conglomerate really was at its height maybe 20 years ago. when retailers got bigger and bigger,
Right.
they became bigger and bigger chains, and the consumer products companies wanted bigger scale and muscle so that they could negotiate prices better with retailers. They could have more leverage when going up against a Walmart, for example.
Interesting.
So that was a big factor in the growth of these companies. There's a lot of attention paid to price. Retailers want the lowest possible price. We see that at Walmart. We see that at Costco. We see that at most of the big chains now. And so the retailers have put pressure on consumer companies to keep their profit margins thin, their prices low. And the best way for them to accomplish that back in the old days was to just get bigger and bigger so they had more leverage with these companies. That's a big part of it. And in addition, the advertising market. Back in the day, we watched TV, and that's how we got our information. And the ads, the 30-second ads, were dominated by the big consumer products companies. They were the big spenders in advertising. The media landscape has fractured so much now that big food has really lost that advantage in terms of reaching our eyeballs. And there are so many different ways: TikTok, direct sales, Instagram. There's so many different ways to reach consumers now that it's no longer necessarily a huge advantage to have that big marketing budget.
Interesting. Unilever is one of the big consumer conglomerates. It's been very much in the news at the moment, Jessica. Recently ditched its second CEO in 2 years. What's going on at Unilever? What are investors unhappy about?
Well, the company is trying to turn around its business. It was really focused on sustainability and making sure all of its brands had a purpose. Originally started a couple of CEOs ago, and that was thought to be a differentiator in the sea of other consumer products out there. But that has they've just struggled along the way. And the food business in particular, which has its biggest market in the US, is under a lot of pressure because consumers here in the US are pulling back overall. They've just been hit with inflation and they're buying less.
Big food seems to be having a particularly bad time of it of late. What's going on?
Well, we're seeing consumers looking for healthier choices. There's a very big health and wellness trend, and some of the brands that were thought of as very convenient, very easy to make, are being looked at a little bit differently now as unhealthy, as highly processed. We have a new health head in the US that has made this a personal mission to make America healthier. So people are more aware of what they're eating. The population is aging as well, and older people are becoming increasingly concerned about what they're consuming. So big food is under a lot of pressure to become healthier.
How worried is big food by RFK Jr., the new Secretary of Health?
They're worried. They're reevaluating what is in their products. They're looking at food dye. They're looking at mystery ingredients that people see on the back of a package and they don't know what it is.
Okay.
They're looking at trying to engage with this Make America Healthy Again commission that has been set up. So they're kind of in a defensive crouch over how this all could play out.
There's also a question of price as well. I mean,
that is the big, yeah.
Right. Like consumer goods companies, they did well during the pandemic, right? Like everyone was at home bulk buying disinfectant and kind of chocolate.
Yeah, the pandemic was a great time for consumer goods companies. People had a lot of extra income. They were stocking up in their pantry. They were buying a lot more frozen food, cleaning supplies, toilet paper, and hoarding.
Right.
Spending more time at home, using a lot of it. And they went to their trusted brands. They went to the brands that they knew worked. So like the Tide detergents of the world, the Pampers of the world. The smaller brands also had difficulty with supply chain.
Of course, yeah.
Big brands did too, but the smaller brands really did. So the big companies got a big pandemic boost.
So have things kind of turned on their heads post-pandemic? Like we've come out of the pandemic. Consumers everywhere are sick of price rises. Has the goodwill gone away? Has it disappeared, Vanessa? But that contract between the consumer and those big brands that they trusted during COVID.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have seen Procter & Gamble successfully take multiple price hikes, and that has been a source of growth.
Mm-hmm.
And Unilever, Nestle as well, has been a source of growth for years. what we're seeing now is it's getting even more difficult for them to continue to hike prices because people are just sick of it.
Right.
And they're more budget conscious. So they're going to be open to trying new things.
That consumer focus on cost and a willingness to try new things has created an opening for smaller, independent brands, known in the industry as insurgent brands. They often adopt guerrilla or viral marketing campaigns to take on the bigger names. Let's take a real-world look at one of them, from the world of mayonnaise.
Hellmann's is one of Unilever's power brands that they're relying on for growth. But there are some brands that are actually quite old but have found new growth and are challenging their position.
We are a Duke's family for the past 100 years.
There's a southern U.S. brand called Duke's that has seen pretty strong market share growth, at least according to Euromonitor. They're priced below at shelf the Hellmann's. And in addition to being priced less, they have interesting different benefits. Like Duke's has no sugar, and people are conscious of sugar. So that's another reason why people are going to Duke's.
That's interesting. What about their marketing? Do they market in a different way to the big brands?
Yes, definitely. Duke's is known for its very creative marketing stunts.
Duke's will be on our bodies and our sandwiches for the rest of our lives.
They gave away tattoos. People were tattooed with Duke's.
Really?
Yeah.
From here to eternity.
So people really love the brand. They also sponsor college football games, and the coach of the winning team, I believe the winning team, gets gets a vat of mayo poured over him at the end of the game. So these things just endear the brand to consumers.
Look, it's beautiful.
One thing I don't understand, Jessica, is how these smaller brands can be cheaper. Like, I thought the whole rationale for being a conglomerate is that you can centralize and keep your costs down.
Well, one thing that has changed recently is it is easier to be a smaller brand because there is a big growth in co-manufacturers. So these basically smaller factories that can make products at scale for a startup brand. And that helps keep costs down. And of course, as these smaller brands grow, they can become competitive on price.
So are these kind of like factories for hire, sort of?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. The mercenaries of the consumer goods world.
Basically, yeah.
I mean, there's also, it's interesting, Vanessa, you mentioned the kind of, in terms of the history of the conglomerates, the consumer conglomerates, that part of their growth was a reaction to these huge retailers, these Walmarts and whatnot. They're also facing competition now, aren't they, from retailers' own brands?
Oh, absolutely. So yes, retailers, Walmart, Costco, Aldi, there is a huge move by retailers to also use those contract manufacturers that Jessica mentioned to make their own brand lines. So competing head-to-head with Nestle, competing head-to-head with Unilever, competing head-to-head with Procter & Gamble on their branded products. There is an option that is the Walmart store brand. In fact, there are multiple store brands, and those have become enormous, and they are almost always priced well below the brand name product. In the United States, we have been reluctant to rush to these private label or store brands, more reluctant than in Europe, where they are commonplace, but we are getting with the program now. We're getting with the program now.
Vanessa, if I can ask you, the logic of being a conglomerate in this space, does it still make sense?
I will say, I think it makes sense to the degree they can slim down, get more efficient, protect their profit margins. And to figure out how they're going to do that, they are going to rely on people who are very familiar with financial engineering methods. So Unilever's new CEO, as of March 1st, is a former CFO. And I think that's a sign right there that the company is going to be looking to probably slim down, restructure a bit more, and use some financial engineering tactics to adjust, basically. Right now, these companies are so enormous, they are almost like an index fund
right,
of consumer products, to use a financial services term. And what we're seeing is that boards are getting a little bit less patient, really. They want CEOs who can get with the program, bring in changes quickly, help position these companies for this whole new era, this whole new post-pandemic era. And so I think we're going to see continued turnover at the CEO ranks.
Interesting.
As we have, the average tenure of a consumer and retail CEO is 7.7 years. That's pretty short, actually. That's pretty short. And it shows that boards are impatient. They want people now who can bring change and show that they are able to get rid of the slow selling units, have a vision for slimming the company down. So we're going to see a lot of change, I think. We're going to see a lot of change in the consumer products companies for sure in 2025.
Now, Unilever has said there's no change to its 2025 outlook or its medium-term forecast and says it's committed to further accelerating its growth plan. Jessica, will we see consumer goods companies bulk up in some areas where they see like higher margins and more volume growth, or will it all be slimming down?
I think we will see some M&A for sure, where they're adding on to they're looking for growth. So they're going to acquire a brand that's growing. We saw that one of the insurgent brands that has been identified as an insurgent brand is called Sour Strips.
Okay.
It's a gummy candy. Hershey acquired it. It's a pivot away from chocolate, which is very expensive, into something that's very popular. So we for sure will see companies bulk up in areas that make sense for them, that consumers are interested in, that are not experiencing extreme inflation, and that may be something they can't create themselves that quickly.
How does the threat of tariffs play into all of this?
I will say that right now is a really interesting time because with these tariff talks now, that could throw a wrench into a lot of M&A because of the uncertainty of how tariffs could affect these companies and also just affect the consumer. So yes, we would under normal circumstances really be expecting to see a lot more M&A in this space. We're not sure yet how the impact of tariffs might affect that.
What does all this mean for the consumer, right? This increased competition that we're seeing in the aisles online, these big brands under pressure. What's the fallout for the consumer in all this?
I would say, it's a really bad time for the consumer in many ways right now.
Okay.
Because prices are still pretty high. So if you're a low-income consumer, for example, and you go to a dollar store, you go to the supermarket, it doesn't look good. Everything's pretty expensive.
Right.
However, this competition from insurgent brands is a good thing and should hopefully help bring prices down and inspire Big Food to get a little bit more innovative and responsive to consumer tastes.
And I've got to ask you, before we go, is there any consumer brand you'd be happy to get tattooed on any part of your body?
No, not to that extent. Absolutely not. Never.
What about you, Jessica?
I don't think so. Although, when I think about the world at large, some people I think would maybe get a tattoo of their favorite soda. Those inspire the kind of loyalty that could lead to a tattoo. But no, for me, no.
A big thank you to Jessica and Vanessa. You can catch their work, including the latest take on those insurgent brands, on Reuters.com and the Reuters app. Sound design, music composition and engineering on this episode was by Josh Summer. Our podcast team includes Kim Vanell, Tara Oakes, Gail Issa, Jonah Green, David Spencer, Sharon Reich-Garson and Christopher Walljasper. Our executive producer is Leela de Kretzer. Remember, for all your daily news, check out our weekday show, Reuters World News. You can catch it on the Reuters app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.